local elected officials present. We did send out a very late notice, and I apologize to those who weren't able to join us. We may have some of them joining us shortly. I do see Senator Jim Moylan present. Senator, thank you so much for making time. I also want to, of course, recognize our media partners for being present with us again this evening, your morning, and for making your media platforms available for us to, of course, not only communicate directly with you, but with your listening and viewing audience. So that being said, if there are no opening items from anyone present on the call, I'll go ahead and begin. So we've had a number of issues on our island with respect to the funding that we received under the American Rescue Plan, particularly the state and local funding and the status of that state and local funding with the, the EIT, the non-entitlement units, funding for the hospital. And we also had a question from our speaker regarding the earned income tax credit. So we took the initiative to reach out to US Treasury to get actual clarity on some of the items that have been unclear. And I wanted to take this opportunity to bring the island up to speed on the clarity we are getting from Treasury, and to also just be very transparent about how that clarity that we're getting from Treasury is not jiving with the communications we're getting from the administration. And we could also have a discussion about that to try and get to the bottom of, what's the actual status of these funds and what we can do to work together to try and get a real-time answer on where everything is at. First and foremost, I want to begin with the earned income tax credit. The speaker reached out to our office and she asked if we can clarify whether we are supposed to be receiving any EITC reimbursements this year, 2021, for tax year 2020, or if the EITC reimbursements were accruing under the 2021 tax collections to be paid out in 2022. Based on our clarity from Treasury, Guam will receive for tax year 2021, this tax year, and not for tax year 2020. So we are not expecting any kind of EITC reimbursements for 2020 to be coming in during 2021. It should be coming in next year, 2022, for this current tax year, 2021. So we're going to need first the 2021 taxes to be paid, those amounts to be reconciled, those EITC figures to be determined. Once those EITC figures are determined, they'll be put to Treasury, and then Treasury will reimburse Guam for the EITC expenses for the 2021 tax year. On the subject of non-entitlement units, this was a major issue. This was, of course, brought to our attention by Senator Moylan when he requested clarity on trying to get funding directly to our grassroots communities. And over the course of that conversation, it was brought to light that there were actually 3 different funding pools that made its way to Guam under the American Rescue Plan, specific to funding going into government entities for their use. The first, of course, was the state and local funding. That's the funding that we are very familiar with, at least in terms of the amount. And that's the $553 million that is under the discretion of the governor. The second amount is a $32 million allotment that came to Guam as a county allocation that is also under the discretion of the governor. And the third amount is supposed to be a non-entitlement unit funding that's supposed to go to, to put it plainly, the mayors were supposed to receive that according to the governor's office. In our initial communications, we brought up the fact that the county funding, the $32 million, should go to the mayors. And then the governor came back and countered, saying, no, that's not for the mayors, that's to the local government because we don't have quote unquote counties. So they're supposed to receive the non-entitlement unit funding. So we reached back out to Treasury, we asked for clarification, and apparently Treasury is operating under what the administration is communicating to them. And according to Treasury, in May, the administration received the $553 million in May, and they received the $32 million in county funding. And the administration made it plain to Treasury that there is no county funding. That funding was therefore now under the administration's jurisdiction for the entirety of the island. So technically, the amounts that they have for total discretion under the governor is not 553 million, but actually 553 plus 32.6. So it's actually 585.6 million. We further inquired as to the non-entitlement unit funding, and we said, okay, well, if the counties are not going to be going directly to the municipalities, the governor is saying that they want to use the non-entitlement unit funding for the mayors. And so we asked, what's the status of this funding? And apparently, Treasury already remitted the non-entitlement unit funding. They remitted that funding back in June. So all of the money has been received by the local government. The NEU funding was broken into two tranches, a total of 17.6 divided by 2. So they received 8.8 million in June of this year, and they're going to receive another 8.8 million in June of next year. But the 8.8 million has been in the bank and sitting since June. And so we inquired as to what the status is of this NEU money and what's causing the delay in getting it to our mayors. And Treasury's communication back to us was, and I'll quote, Guam received half of its total NEU allocation of 17.6 million on 6/16/2021, and the territory was holding it until Treasury provided further guidance on the allocation process, given that Guam does not have any NEUs. Treasury recently provided guidance to Guam on the funding, which reallocated the funding to the county of Guam and allows the county to use funds for eligible uses. So this is where things get really, really strange. The governor was saying the administration, their officials, and you folks in the media actually interviewed them. They were saying that the county money isn't going to the mayors because it's supposed to go only to Guam, and the NEU funding is supposed to go to the mayors. But what Treasury is being told is that we don't have NEUs and that money should go to the county allocation. And so the question remains, where's the mayor money? Because if the administration is saying the county allocation is not for mayors, and if the administration is telling Treasury they want the NEU money to be classified as county money, then what's happening to the mayor funds? So in total, based on how everything now is being allocated, the total amount of discretionary funding that the governor is lump summing under her control is 602.6 million. Takes us right back to the $600 million state and local funding figure that we initially quoted you folks back when we reported the availability of these funds to the passage of the American Rescue Plan. I don't know what to tell the mayors exactly, other than the fact that we believe that the 32 million in county funding, based on the spirit of the law, should go to the municipalities. The non-entitlement unit funding, if they want to consider that county funding, should also go to the municipalities. If they're not going to allocate the original 32 million because it was originally county funding and they're holding firm that there are no counties on Guam, then they shouldn't be reapportioning the NEU funding into counties and at the same time telling the public and telling the mayors that the NEU funding is actually supposed to be going to them. So that's the status on that debacle. All the federal money is going to is leaving the feds and going local, but where it's going based on the spirit of the law and based on how things are being interpreted at this time is functionally very different from what we're being told. And on that subject, I wanted to dovetail finally into the funding for the new hospital. We've been told since May, since the 553 million, the 585 million, 85.6 million was received, was that there's going to be amounts set aside for the funding of a new hospital. And we were told in the months since that time that the administration's waiting on guidance from Treasury. And we've been told that over and over again, they're not going to use the money, they're waiting for Treasury to issue guidance. So we reached out to Treasury and we said, hey, there's $300 million in relief money that our governor is sitting on and she's waiting for guidance. Where is this guidance? And Treasury came back and said, please note that Treasury is not pre-approving proposed expenditures or calculations of revenue loss. They're basically saying Treasury is not going to be giving any special guidance. They said very specifically, we encourage state and local leaders to work within the current framework of the interim final rule and frequently ask questions and consult with counsel as needed to make decisions that comport with the current guidance to evaluate whether a particular expenditure is an eligible use of funds. So we've been told, our local leadership has been told, our people have been told, our media partners have been told over and over again that we're waiting for some guidance from Treasury, and Treasury's not giving that guidance. So there is there's a serious lack of clarity, to put it nicely, on why exactly this money continues to be held up. Those are the three main items on the Treasury issues that we've been able to clarify. EITC, non-entitlement units, and hospital money. And I use the word clarify lightly. I guess we've been able to get more information on, and I wanted to make that information available to our media folks, to the public, and to our local leadership. And I'll go ahead and pause here for any questions from those present on the call. We'll go ahead and yield first to local leadership present. I do see, and staff, if you can correct me if we had anybody else enter, I do see Senator Moylan, and Senator Moylan, I'll go ahead and yield to you if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Congressman, for the information. No questions, but of course, I do appreciate your clarification with the US Treasury. Specifically, I was concerned about how we're going to be able to pass this money on to our mayors. Based on our last conversation that you were able to have with us and Mayor Alec, we brought that issue up regarding the $32 million to the governor, and we were clearly told that the money is coming or will be paid. The mayors will be paid. Since that time, we've had our conversation, and since the governor has made that statement, I believe the mayors have not been paid, and they're wondering when they're going to receive this funding from the American Rescue Plan to help their villages. I'm extremely disappointed to hear that the reason why this money is not going directly, the $32 million nor the 17.6, is because of what our administration has told the U.S. Treasury. It seems like the federal government wanted to do the right thing, and we were trying to express to the governor that it is the right thing to do. The intent was to pass this money down to our counties, so we don't have it specifically as addressed as a county, but these are our villages, right? Though we're connected by roads, these are our mayors that know how to spend the money where it's most needed and could really use this funding. But to learn now that the U.S. Treasury Department was told by our administration, by our governor, to say, no, just put it all in one pot. That's extremely disappointing. I plan to find out more from the governor why this is happening. I plan to ask the Mayor's Council also. We need to do something about this. The 36th Guam legislature has been disappointed with the governor's stance on how she addresses to utilize the American Rescue funding. I understand that the Organic Act does give her the authority, but we still need to work together. And if the governor is closing us out, the senators, and closing the mayors out as well, how is that working together? And most recently, the governor is now again with the National Governors Association Conference, and is one of her comments is basically insulting the 36th Guam legislature by saying that I'm glad they have no, basically, I'm glad the senators have no say in how this money is going to be spent. You're using taxpayers' money to go that far, to go in front of all the national governors over there to insult the legislature. This isn't how we work together and being transparent to the people of Guam. The legislature is a co-equal branch of government and the people come to us for answers. And we reflect those questions, and we pass measures to help the response to the governor so they can hear the people's voices. I appreciate, Congressman, that you are doing all this and finding the information out for us, because I don't see how we would have known this without you asking directly to the US Treasury. When we ask the governor, we don't get these kind of answers. But with your assistance, now we're knowing much more. And this is the disappointment I have with this administration. We wouldn't have this type of back and forth if we could just have been transparent. So I want to thank you, Congressman, for this information, and I look forward to driving this further and getting the answers from the governor. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Congressman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. And just for clarity, we're not looking to present a contrarian view. As a matter of fact, I would much rather prefer that we don't have to go in and get this kind of clarity. I think it would be better for all of us who have responsibilities to the public, and for our media, who has a responsibility to report accurately to the public, to be able to just get the information that we're requesting, and not having to go back and re-clarify or reconfigure or ask for a different or go directly to the source to ask for them to help us understand what the reality is. And it's troubling, to say the least, that lack of transparency is one thing, but a deliberate attempt to obfuscate and to mislead is another. And right now, absent any kind of evidence to the contrary, the communications we're getting from Treasury are actually contrary to what's being shared with us by the administration. I'll go ahead and pause there and turn it over to our media partners. I do not see any other local elected leaders on the call. We do have first in the order with Nestor, and then Jerry, and then Phil. I'm sorry, Nestor, Jerry, and then Maureen, and then Phil. So let me go ahead and begin with Nestor. Go ahead.
I think I was first. Have a day, Congressman. Hello, everybody. So just to be clear, so you're saying now that the non-entitlement funds, both the 32 million and then the 8.8 million, which is half of the 17.6, should go directly to the mayors. When we passed the American Rescue Plan, we specifically bifurcated state and local funding. State funding went to governors, and local funding went to subunits of government, whether they were counties, whether they were municipalities. Villages, of course, are not. It's not a common term in the in CONUS, the contiguous U.S., but they are a local form of government, and they should be lumped, if not considered under the county portion of the funding, definitely under the NEU portion of the funding. And that was done for a very specific purpose. The Congress understood that while, of course, governors have a responsibility to the overall state, there may be a difference in priorities or a difference in focus areas if certain governors had certain agendas that might be contrary to local city managers or local leaders on a more on a smaller scale. And so the Congress purposely carved up the county funding and the NEU funding away from the state and local, away from the state funding. So those smaller units of government, those smaller units of management, those smaller units of leadership will be able to have a resource to go out and address their direct constituency priorities. And so, the governor has $553 million in state funding. The $32 million in county funding and the $17 million in NEU funding, all of that in the spirit of the law was not intended to go to state governors. It was intended to go to the subunits below the actual overall government. And so in the spirit of the law, absolutely, the county funding and the NEU funding should go to the mayors. They're the subunit that goes directly into the grassroots. If they were technically classified as counties, they would be receiving that as county funding. And if they had subunits beneath them, those subunits would be receiving NEU funding. But because we did not decentralize our subunits of government that specifically, Guam the county funding just became lumped into the Guam funding. And now it looks like the administration is intending to have the NEU funding also lumped into that county funding, which also is being lumped into the overall state funding. So it's like they're backwashing the entire local funding amount, the 32 million and the 17 million, and they're scalping it and putting it into their own $553 million pot to balloon it into a $602 million pot. So if your question is, do I believe that the 32 million and the 17 million should be going to our subunits, to our villages? Absolutely. That was the intent of the Congress. $553 million for a governor, the governor of Guam is a lot of money already. And so we want to have the remainder getting to the local units.
Okay, because she mentioned, and I don't know if you saw it, but during the panel discussion at the National Governors Association yesterday, she said she has 596 million, and that the law specific, I'm paraphrasing here, the law was designed to provide that to the governors. She said something to that effect. 596 million that she received was through the work of the governors, and that was the intent of the law, that it would go to the governors. So at this particular point, I don't know if Treasury is going to step in. I don't think they will. So it will be up to the governor to make that decision to give it to the mayors. How's that going to work?
Ultimately, that's looking like how it's going to turn out. And that obviously wasn't the intent of how those funds were allocated. But it looks like the administration is taking the nuances of the law and working that angle to try and turn it into administration discretion funding rather than it going directly to the subunits that it's intended to. And it's very troubling, Nestor, because what was originally communicated was, and they were very adamant about this. I mean, they said, oh, we're surprised. They don't know what they're talking about. That 32 million is county money. The NEU money is supposed to go to the mayors. And we said, well, okay, well, let's track down this NEU money. And in tracking it down, we found that 8 million of it has been sitting on the island since June. And the administration has been working to actually reclassify that money from NEU money into county money, which they're saying shouldn't be going to mayors anyway. So what we're trying to do at this juncture, Nestor, is we're trying to at least provide the transparency and the clarity so that, if it's not going to happen automatically the way the law intended, at least we can create the public awareness environment and the awareness among local leadership environment for us to all work together to try and make the right thing happen. And the right thing to do is to have those monies go to where they were intended. Because right now, the way it's going to turn out is that all that money that should have gone to our villages is now going to get lumped into the discretionary pot. And, if the governor wants to give it to you, she can, but there won't be any obligation for her to.
Okay. Second question is, just to be clear, the set aside for the hospital, is that allowed or not allowed under the spending guidance framework?
If it was allowed under the interim rule, then it would have already been firmly, the governor's office would have firmly stated that they have set it aside for that purpose. And they probably would have been starting to commit allocations of it for that purpose. But what I'm understanding here clearly in the communication from Treasury is that they're not going to pre-approve any request from any local governments to spend it a certain way, use the interim guidance. And the interim guidance is clear. The interim rule says that the funds can be used to respond to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. It's to provide a response to workers performing essential workers during the COVID-19 public health emergency by providing premium pay to eligible workers. It's for the provision of government services, the extent of the reduction in revenue, as in our local revenues, due to the COVID-19 public health emergency collected in the most recent full fiscal year prior to the emergency. So if we had lower revenues, then we can use it to supplement that, or to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. There's no specification that these funds can be used for the construction of a new hospital. So I don't know. I don't know why we're being told we're waiting for Treasury guidance when it's very clear that that guidance is actually not forthcoming. I did ask the Treasury Secretary in my hearing today, I said, certain expenditures are not eligible under the interim final rule. Can we expect any material differences in the final rule? And they said that they'll be issuing the final rule shortly. And at that time, we'll be able to see what that language entails. But as of right now, there is no communication that the interim final rule or the final rule are going to change in any way to authorize that expenditure. I don't know if the governor is actually waiting and hoping that the final rule will grant that authority. And if it does, then it can be used for that purpose. But the bottom line in all of it is that there's a serious lack of clarity, because we're being told we're waiting for Treasury guidance, and Treasury is not issuing any further guidance with respect to how they can use the funds. They're saying use it the way we're telling you can use it. Talk to your lawyers if you have to, and from there you can make the commitments. And the fact that the funds have not actually been committed in a bona fide fashion just underscores the point that the guidance that the interim final rule puts forward, it does not grant that authority at this time.
All right. Thanks, Congressman. I'll defer to the next rep.
Okay. I think we have Phil next. I'm sorry, Jerry.
Yes, Congressman. So if this is the first time the Treasury is knowing what is happening on Guam, that the money that they sent is still not being used, what do you think will happen? Is there a possibility of sanctions being imposed? Or of a hold being put on the use of the money?
I'm not seeing that at this time. Our office is being very careful. You know, despite the frustrations that we share with the community about getting funds to where it needs to go and having it expended for the purposes intended, we're also being extra careful not to put Guam into a negative light and to create any kind of reputational risk for the island that could result in us having difficulties in any future possible considerations, whether they're pandemic related or anything else that might be a potential benefit to the people of Guam. So our communications have all just been requests for clarification or for clarity. We are not raising any, we're not going out there saying, hey, we need to have we need to get sanctioned or anything. That we're not looking for any of that. What we don't want to do is we also don't want to risk having any of the amounts clawed back because they're somehow being regarded as a double dip, which is, something that is always a risk, especially if we're getting one allotment for county and we're trying to get an NEU allotment also reconsidered for county. I mean, those kind of things are very delicate. And so we don't want to cause the island to lose funding. But in that same vein, we also don't want those who are supposed to receive that funding to get shortchanged. So we're right now just getting clarity from Treasury, and the clarity coming back is basically that the information we're being told as to why money isn't going to where it's supposed to be going is inconsistent with what's actually being advised or deferred for advisement by Treasury.
Okay, knowing what you know now, because of your reaching out to Treasury, what would you recommend that Adelup do? Well, Adelup can say that, this is the first time we're hearing it also. But what should they do now? Now that that's out in the open, that that Treasury has clarified, given that clarification on the guidelines, what do you recommend that Adelup do? Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing is exactly what Senator Moylan initiated. This county money and this non-entitlement unit money should go to the villages. I'm seeing ads of, we gave you 25,000, you should be happy, but they're actually owed, based on this, 32 plus 17 million, $50 million. That's over $2 million. That's about $2.5 million per village. If you broke it down on a per village basis, you broke it down on a population basis, you're talking about much larger sums for much larger villages. And if you're just talking about the NEU funding, that's $8.8 million since June. So, I mean, obviously, the first thing and the right thing to do would be to, of course, you have your state pot, your $553 million pot, be transparent with where that money is going so the legislature can properly match how it's spending local funds to maximize the return on the overall sum. And then let the local funding, the county funding, the NEU funding, that $49 million, let it go to the directly to the local, to the villages where it was intended. You know, our mayors and our villages have a lot of things they can do with those funds that would be of significant benefit to the communities. And so that's the obvious answer. Whether or not that's going to be the outcome is entirely, at this point, it's entirely subjective.
Okay, thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Jerry. We have next, I see Phil here. Phil?
Congressman, I thought that Maureen was ahead of me, and I'm always okay with defaulting to Maureen.
Of course, yeah, I would default to Maureen as well. Maureen?
Thank you, both gentlemen. Congressman, have you seen the administration's ARPA spending plan, which is a long list of items? And do you have any comment on that?
I did see it. And, you know, that investment para Hamzu, I found it to be interesting. You know, it was there's been so many calls for transparency, and you know, what that unveiling did was, it's almost like when you FOIA a document from the government and they bring you 12 big cardboard boxes full of documents and say it's somewhere in there, or this is what you asked for, go ahead and try and dig it out. The investment para Hamzu announcement was a response for a call for transparency, but it actually, especially when I drilled down into those numbers and saw how it was being presented, it actually was a further obfuscation. Because the request for transparency that's coming from our local leadership was, first of all, and more specifically to, how is that $553 million that the governor is receiving under her discretion, how is that specifically going to be spent? And there was no specific breakdown that itemized out the full expenditure plan of that $553 million. What they did was they said, we received 553, we also received X amount, we received X amount and X amount. And then they proceeded to say, this is going here, this is going there, this is going here, and this is going there. But what they didn't clarify was that the amounts going to certain subcategories that they itemized were already getting funded from different funding streams. Those were direct funding allotments from the American Rescue Plan and from the various 6 different relief packages that we passed prior to the American Rescue Plan. And so they shoved all the numbers together to just muddy up what actually has come in, what is going where, and what the source of those funds is. And so there still is no clarity on what the actual spending plan is on the $553 million. They kind of just lumped it all together and then broke it all out without clarifying what's getting funded from the 553 and what's getting funded from a direct allotment that was itemized through the legislation passed in the Congress. So long and short, Maureen, I still think that we lack clarity on what the true spending plan is on the discretionary sums. I think that the investment para Hamzu has a breakdown over how some monies are going to be channeling through, but we still don't quite understand. We still don't quite have an understanding of where the discretionary funds are going, and specifically how those are going to be spent. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. For my second question, so the Treasury is not saying that the administration is not taking a position on whether the administration can take funding from the ARPA money. But if, for instance, in the final rule or elsewhere, it turns out the administration cannot use ARPA funding, Do you have any comment on whether Guam should go to the bond market, or whether perhaps look for private sector financing as GRMC did?
Absolutely. Oh, in terms of building a hospital facility.
Yes, and getting the funding for it.
Right. Well, we do have in the Build Back Better, which still needs to be enacted, we do have about $345 million in play for infrastructure funding that can be used to fund a new hospital. So we're going to continue working hard to get that through, as well as all the many other provisions in that legislation. And then anything above and beyond that 345, we absolutely can go out and seek financing for, of course, in a sensible manner, so that the financing is done in a way that it leverages the value and adds value rather than causes a debt burden for stuff that's more bells and whistles than actual substantive healthcare. But, if the governor is already saying that she doesn't need the full 300 million, she only needs 200 some million, then
yes,
the 345 million, based on whatever projection she's using, should be sufficient and then some for a healthcare facility. So I would prior to going to the bond market, I don't think we need to rush into debt if we still have that amount in play, and if the legislation still has a very good chance of enactment into law. And once that happens or doesn't happen, then we can decide what the next best steps are going to be.
Do you know when that Build Back Better bill, just to clarify, will be signed into law?
The Senate still needs to entertain it. This is just my my estimate based on how things happen, but there's nothing firm on this. But my estimate is we should be entertaining this before the end of the calendar year, and I would further go so far as to say before the Christmas break, because the legislation does impact a continuity of certain tax benefits, particularly the child tax credit. And so that expires at the end of 2021. If we do want it to continue into 2022, and we don't want to create administrative headache for the IRS and for the tax agencies, then we would need to enact that before the end of 2021. And likely that kind of an enactment would happen before the winter holidays.
Okay, thank you. And I happily pass the mic back to Phil.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks, Maureen. Thank you, Congressman. I had a question about the EITC. So the Guam legislature appropriated the FY21 EITC in the current budget act, and I guess kind of concurrently introduced separate spending measures. So with the clarity that you got from Treasury, I guess just to make sure that I'm understanding, the appropriation that was made in the Budget Act kind of speaks for that funding source through the end of this fiscal year. And so basically the legislature can't afford those additional spending measures that tap into this EITC reimbursement.
That is a good question. And I believe that's the reason why the speaker reached out to our office for the clarification. And we've already provided the clarification to the speaker. I'll go ahead and defer to her leadership on what to do about those appropriations for the FY21 Gov Guam budget. We are going to be receiving in calendar year 2022 the EITC for tax year 2021. Whether or not that funding is going to be received before the expiration of the fiscal year is uncertain. And I would actually be unable to get any kind of clarity from Treasury as to the timing of that, because Treasury this is an entirely new reimbursement. And so I'm sure they're going to take extra time to reconcile the amounts for this initial first payment and to create the process for this first payment and all subsequent payments. So whether or not we should continue to maintain those appropriations and hope for the best so the money comes in on time to balance the budget, I personally wouldn't do it. I would say let's wait till we actually have the money, hit the coffers before we go out and commit it, because there's a risk that it might not hit the coffers prior to the expiration of the fiscal year. But that's ultimately going to be a decision by the legislature, and that's going to be something that the speaker is going to have to provide leadership on, which is exactly why I think she reached out and asked us to clarify. I'm sure there'll be something forthcoming from her office.
And on the funding for the mayors through the American Rescue Plan, so I'm just trying to understand whether or not, just functionally, whether or not the governor receiving the 32 million and the 17 million respectively is just kind of reflective of our system of government, how the Guam Department of Education receives state funds and county funds and local funds, and then distributes it throughout the public school system. And so I guess just barring the functionality of how this money is deposited, I'm just hearing that your continued call is that this money should be given to the Mayor's Council of Guam, correct?
That is correct. That was the intent of the Congress, that the state and local funding should not be commingled under a single governor, that the governors should have the discretion over what is allocated to the state, and the local funding should go to the subunits beneath the governor that have responsibility to a different constituency base. Or I'm sorry, not a different, but a more specific constituency base.
And I guess the reason why I bring that up is I wanted to get your thoughts as a federal lawmaker, whether or not Congress should consider or perhaps reconsider how it deals with our local government, and maybe whether it should start decentralizing the funding and aid it gives to the island.
Oh, no, that's a very good point. And it actually that football goes back into the, back across the 50-yard line into the local government, because the Congress will not unilaterally redefine how we specifically categorize our sub-units of government. And so if we want to designate our villages as counties, or if we want to create, Southern County, Central County, Northern County, those are things that the local government needs to initiate. I do want to make it clear that the mayors aren't in the Organic Act. It's a function of local law. And so if we want to define our local substructure in a specific way, that's absolutely work for the Guam legislature and for the local governor. I would advise that we strongly consider those things, because as we're learning how funds are flowing from the federal government into subunits of government, it's very apparent that having that kind of uniformity in structure does provide benefits for resources to get directly to the subunits of government. There may be a lack of appetite to do so, because absent that clarity, we're going to continue to see what we're seeing right now, which is the money getting lumped under the governor and not getting directly into the villages.
Thank you, Congressman. I'll wait for the next round.
Thanks, Phil. We have Troy next, I see.
Hi, Congressman.
Hi.
Buenas, good morning. Guam's in a unique situation where our governor also is her family owns the bank where our treasury mostly is. And I honestly don't have confirmation whether all this money has been deposited into that bank, but is there a concern that, first, would you know whether that kind of money grows interest to the benefit of that bank, or whatever bank it's in?
Well, I want to avoid speaking specifically to any kind of affiliations, but I can speak generally to what happens when deposits are held in excess in a financial institution. And what happens is a financial institution takes in deposits, and they take those deposits and they can then, at a certain ratio, give out loans based on those deposits. The more deposits you have, the more loans you can give out. But there does reach a finite point where your loan market is only so big and your deposits can begin exceeding what your loan market is needing, and your ratios can become more heavily weighted on the deposit side. When that happens, deposits in excess of reserves are oftentimes lent back to the Federal Reserve, and they earn interest from the Federal Reserve, who takes those excess deposits you have and uses it for reserves for other banks. They basically loan it to other banks to help build their deposit base in case their loan ratios are not as robust. Okay. And so when any financial institution has a large sum of deposits, they either can grow their loan portfolio, or if they don't want to do that for whatever reason, or if their loan portfolio is kind of tapped out because the market only has so much capacity, they do earn interest by lending that back to the Federal Reserve and having the Federal Reserve lend those funds out to other financial institutions that need those deposit reserves.
So it's almost like a bank having a bank account with the Federal Reserve, and that bank account growing interest in a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally money in the bank. And so, yeah, it just goes into the financial system, and you can either make money by loaning out your deposits, or you can make money by lending your deposits to other financial institutions.
I'm going to give this would be a shout out to the Pacific Daily News. Recently, there was an opinion published in the news, a Voice of the People. Governor, please give $1,000 to each eligible taxpayer for Christmas. I know you commented before on a Christmas stimulus. You want to talk about that again? Using this ARPA money, since there's more now. I think that's disposal. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. No, same point. As I was reading out again, the eligible uses of the funds. Not only can it be used for a stimulus for the community, which I think is necessary. And as a matter of fact, I'm just seeing the news on Omicron, and I'm seeing how Japan is completely shut down. We're looking at a prolonged environment where tourism is going to continue to struggle, to put it lightly. And in that context, we're going to continue to see workers not getting as many hours. We're going to continue to see workers having a difficult time getting jobs. And, the financial strain that families are going to be under is going to continue to exacerbate. So absolutely, these funds can be used for a stimulus for the holidays. And again, as I read out, they can be used for providing premium pay to essential workers. We keep repeating that, but there's just there's no appetite for it, despite the fact that the plate is not only $553 million full, but it's now actually, $602 million full. So, I'm not quite, all I can do is raise awareness and raise the point. And of course, our local leaders are doing the same. But we are here now at this time, and things continue to remain status quo.
Thank you.
Do we have any that concludes those who've signed up for the initial round. Do we have any other questions from any participants?
Hi, Congressman, it's Nestor. I have a follow-up question. So regarding the NEU funds again, so what would be your advice to mayors to assert their claim to that money?
Knock on the door and tell the governor, hey, the congressman is saying this is supposed to go to us. Where is it? And I would absolutely endorse that. The spirit of the law was for those funds to go to our local units of government. Our mayors are our direct leadership in our villages. They are elected by our villages, by the people in our villages. If the law just called them counties, if it was the county of Talafofo, the county of Dededo, the county of Jigu, they would have gotten the money. There's a serious play on categorization and interpretation, and it's being used to bait and switch the mayors so that the money doesn't go to them, and doesn't go directly to them, and now it has to be asked for, and that just creates all kind of further political implications. I mean, why do our mayors need to go and beg for money that the Congress intended to go to them if they were just called something differently? So I would absolutely, if I were the mayors, I would absolutely speak up. And that's a significant sum of money. Our mayors, when I was a local senator, it was just repeated over and over again how our villages are struggling just to be able to keep things standing, much less improve them. And so we need to come together as a community, get these resources to where they're needed most. And when we've been communicated that the local mayor's offices have all these needs and they can absolutely use the funds for things that are going to benefit their people. And when the funding from the Congress was intended to go to those subunits of government, then let's do that. That's what we should be doing. And if it's not being done, then as elected officials, the mayors have a duty to their constituency to not worry about whether they're going to piss off the governor or not, and go and bang on that door. Go and bang on that door, and I'll bang on that door with them if they need me to join them and say, hey, this is what it was supposed to be used for. Let's use it for that purpose.
All right, that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Nestor. Do we have any others that might want to follow up with any further questions? If none, Senator Moylan, I would be more than happy to defer to you for any parting words.
Thank you, Congressman. Again, I appreciate the information that you were able to provide for us from the US Treasury Department. This is very helpful. I will continue my conversation with the governor or my one-way conversation with the governor, but I will fight with the mayors to ensure that they do get these monies that should come their way. We just want to help the people of Guam, and this is what it is for. After all, it's called the American Rescue Plan, and it goes down to our communities. It goes down to our villages, and we need to help the people of Guam, and the mayors are the best ones to help us identify that. Just like the 36th Guam legislature, we are the voice of the people. We hear their voices every day, and we continue to echo that strongly to this administration when we have all this funding available, but yet we're stifled by our administration not to ask, but to be told what to do. That's completely wrong. And so I'm very disappointed, but I'm very pleased with your information that you provided to us. And I think this is good information that we needed to hear finally. So thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Senator. And in closing, I would like to ask our media partners, we need your help. It's one thing for there to be an absence of transparency, which I think is self-evident. But at this juncture, these communications from Treasury are indicative of something greater. It's indicative of an obfuscation. When we're being told by administration officials that they're trying to use NEU money for mayors, but then we're finding out that they're actually trying to reclassify NEU money as county money, and we were also being told that county money is not going to mayors, then something's not adding up. And so while I know you work very, very hard to even just get these folks on the phone and have them comment on the record, and that's actually what's really helped us to get to this point, there comes a time where we're going to need to start FOIAing documentation and saying, send me all the emails you've had with US Treasury, because we want to see whether or not what you're saying actually adds up to what's occurring. If you're saying Treasury is telling you to wait for guidance, where's the email from Treasury saying that the guidance is forthcoming? If you're saying that Treasury is, you're asking Treasury for clarification on NEU money, then where is that email asking for that clarification? Or is the email actually saying something different? And I don't mean to put the onus or to give you guys more work. I believe me, I would rather not be having to dig deeper on this end either. But we're talking about, and as I mentioned in my congressional address, a once in a lifetime opportunity to get this right. We have hundreds of millions of dollars that are supposed to be going to certain places, and we're taking people's word at face value only to find that that might not necessarily be the case. And so we're all going to have to I guess, work a little harder to find out what the facts are. And in the end, I hope that our work together and these opportunities for us to find more information, to share that information, and to take action on that information can ultimately result in finally our people getting the relief that they need. Finally, our mayors getting the money they're supposed to. Finally, getting clarity on, are we waiting for Treasury to say something, or has everything already been said? And, that's ultimately not the way things are supposed to be, but it's the way things are right now. So I want to thank all of you for making time, for always being responsive, and for keeping your channels and your media audiences available. I want to thank you also for your very deliberate questions and for the efforts you've all been making thus far. And I'm optimistic that if we can continue to make the efforts that we need to, we'll ultimately create the environment that's going to result in the outcomes that our people deserve. So thank you for your public service, and Senator Moylan, thank you for yours as well. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude this press conference. Si Diyos mas.
Thanks, Congressman.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.